Welcome back to Rocker's Beer Review. Today we're going to be reviewing, ranking in fact, the albums of the heavy metal band Metallica. Heavy metal, hard rock, thrash metal, speed metal. It's really difficult to put them into a real sort of category. They certainly started as a thrash metal, speed metal band in the early 80s, but became so massive in the 90s that they're just a rock band. But which is their best album? They've got quite a few, and they've done a few that are not very good at all. So here's the ranking. Starting with album number 11. It has to be their worst album, and an album that's so bad I can't really bring myself to listen to it again. And this is the album Lulu. Now this was a collaboration that they did in with Lou Reed, and it's just a mess. It's too experimental, and as I said, even for these ranking videos where I re-listen to all the albums again, make sure that I know what I'm talking about, I can hardly bring myself to listen to this album. It really is that bad. So Lulu has to make last place, number 11. In 10th position, also in my opinion, probably a really poor album by Metallica. I mean, let's face it, Metallica are massive. They've done great albums. But in my opinion, album number 10 has to be St. Anger. It's a mess. Where are the hooks? Where's the melody? And for God's sake, where are the guitar solos? For me, it just sounds like noise, and it has to make 10th position, St. Anger. In 9th position, we're getting better. And I'm rating Hardwired to Self-Destruct at number 9. It's a good album, Moth into Flame, the opening 2 tracks. There's a lot more melody and swagger here, but there are still better Metallica albums out there. So it can only really get to number 9 in my rankings. In 8th position, we've got Reload. Now, this was a sort of part of a sort of almost like a double album, Load and Reload, that were released fairly sort of close together, almost like being the Use the Illusion albums, but Guns N' Roses. For me, though, Reload is just a little bit too bloated. It needs a little bit more editing, I think. The Memory Remains, Bad Seed, and really the vastly underrated Low Man's Lyric. I think these are really great songs on this album. Unforgiven Part 2, I don't know. I mean, with this one, it's almost like a reimagining of Unforgiven, and that was such a great song. I don't know why they really need to redo it. So Reload comes in at number 8. In 7th position is Death Magnetic. I think this is a really good album, a real old school type of Metallica album. They got that sort of 80s sound back, I think. The Day That Never Comes, My Apocalypse, That Was Just Your Life are excellent, excellent songs. Even the Unforgiven Part 3, I mean, why are they doing all these different parts? But Part 3, it sounds different enough to the original Unforgiven, and I think it's a really good song. So Death Magnetic for me, a real return to form. Enjoy this album, but it can still only make number 7. In 6th position is Load. Now, after the commercial success of the sort of named Black Album or the self-titled Metallica album, they decided to sort of change their sound up again, making this album a little bit more bluesy. I think Lars Ulrich sort of used the term, it's a bit more of a greasy sound. It's certainly a long way from their sort of thrash origins, really, but there's some really great tracks on this album, and I think it's a really good album. If you've not listened to it and you're not au fait with all the songs on it, definitely give it a listen, because when I re-listened to it again, I realised how much of a strong album it is. Key tracks, Until It Sleeps, and also The Outlaw Torn, I think they're really brilliant tracks. As I say, a bit more of a bluesy vibe, a bit more, I think, in reign with some of the contemporaries of the time, really. It's got a sort of slight of the grunge sort of sound, your Alice in Chains, even bands like Corrosion of Conformity, those sort of bands, there's a little bit more of that sound in there. So Load makes 6th position. In 5th position is their debut, Kill 'Em All. it's quite raw, it's very unreserved. It was very hard hitting, especially when it came out in '83. It was really the start of that whole Bay Area thrash movement, really. I mean, you got Seek and Destroy, Hit the Lights, Motor Breath, Whiplash. Obviously with this album, although it had Kirk Hammett on lead guitar playing on it, a lot of the songs are throwbacks from their sort of demos with Dave Mustaine, so he gets quite a lot of writing credits on this album. But Kill 'Em All, really raw, hard-hitting album, makes 5th position. In 4th position has to be Unjustice for All. I mean, you can't get away from the really terrible production of this album. It really sounds like it was recorded under the sea. And as for the bass on this album, Jason Newsted obviously came into the band after the unfortunate death of Cliff Burton, and you can hardly even hear he's got this bass on this album. The bass is so low in the mix, you always wonder if they actually recorded and actually put in the bass parts. Still, even though the production is pretty bad, there's still some amazing songs. For me, the spine-tingling single One, which still gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. An amazing guitar solo. Definitely, for me, the standout track. But I also love things like Harvester of Sorrow, Blackened, and Dyer's Eve. Great songs, just needs to be... If it was better production, it might have actually moved up a few places. But Unjustice for All makes my 4th position. In 3rd position has to be their self-titled album, Metallica, often known as the Black Album. This, for me, is their massive commercial breakthrough, but the songs are really good. James Hetfield has never sung so well as he has on this album. And I remember when I first heard it, back in the sort of early 90s when it came out, I went to a listening party, but it was at the Hammersmith Odeon, which was like quite a big venue, certainly at the time. And so we went along to the Hammersmith Odeon thinking that there may be a chance that Metallica was going to suddenly appear and play a little set. They didn't, unfortunately, but we sat down, the lights went down, and we heard the album for the first time. This was before the internet. This is the only time you could get to hear these songs before the album was released. And certainly the big songs on that album were like things like Nothing Else Matters and The Unforgiven. You'd never heard James Hetfield sing like that before, and it was quite amazing how clean his vocals were on those songs, and how really great. I mean, the songs obviously themselves, apart from the ballads, are really good. I mean, Enter Sandman is as catchy as anything they've ever done, but there's so many good songs on it. Let me give you an example. I mean, you've got things like Sad But True, Through the Never, really, really great songs. Bob Rock, who did the production on this album, certainly is night and day compared with the previous album, Unjustice for All. Really slick, nice production on this album. And it's Metallica, I think, in terms of their sounds really great. I saw Metallica for the first time in 2012 at the Download Festival, and they played the Black Album in its entirety. But instead of starting with Enter Sandman, they went from the last track and finished with Enter Sandman. So it was a really good experience, and when you hear this album played live, it is quite tremendous. So the self-titled album, Black Album, whatever you want to call it, what you want it to be known as, makes 3rd position. So then we've got the two albums above that. And for me, it was really difficult to pick which one would be my number 2 and which one would be my number 1. But I think in 2nd place has to be Ride the Lightning. Now, Ride the Lightning is one of those sort of definitive Metallica albums. At this point, Cliff Burton and Kirk Hammett are entrenched more into Metallica, so they've got songwriting credits on this album. Certainly, Cliff Burton co-wrote quite a lot of songs on here. And I think the songs are really, really good. I mean, you've got absolute classics like Creeping Death, For Whom the Bells Tolls, and Fade to Black. They're the key standout tracks for me. It's a brilliant album, and on other days I could have almost put it in 1st position. But for me, the definitive Metallica album, the number 1 album in my ranking, has to be Master of Puppets. If only for the title track itself, which is an absolute anthem for Metallica. Brilliant, brilliant song. Battery, though, hard hitting. Sanitarium. I just think this whole album is at their height of their powers, and it really showcases what Metallica's all about. So if anyone says to me, oh, which is the best album I should listen to by Metallica, I would always probably say Master of Puppets. It's a tremendous album. But as I said, Ride the Lightning is very, very close behind. So I hope you've enjoyed my Metallica ranking. What do you think? I mean, Metallica are a massive band. I don't know anyone who's into hard rock, heavy metal music that doesn't like Metallica, or certainly not aware of their albums. But what do you think of maybe some of their later stuff? You know, maybe your introduction to Metallica didn't come until the 90s, and you only really discovered afterwards the amazing albums like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. But let me know in the comments what you think of this ranking. Am I talking rubbish? Maybe there's someone out there that likes Lulu and thinks it's a good album. Well, I think you should go and take a hard look at yourself, because you're definitely wrong. But until the next one, keep on rocking.